This is the 415ers podcast brought to you by the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network with 95.7 The Game. Mark Grandy, Evan Giddings. Follow Mark on social at Mark Grandy. Mark with a C, Grandy with an I. I'm on social at Giddings10. The 415ers are on social wherever you follow Twitter, Instagram, all the rest. Okay, Mark, so I am glad that you brought up, well, one, the offense, but also George Kittle and Elijah Mitchell, because I thought that the addition of, or I should say the re-injection of Elijah Mitchell was going to be huge. I mean, 5 for 55, 2 touchdowns is a highly efficient day, but he's such a bruiser to be able to take some of the load off of Christian McCaffrey. I don't know how much we'll see it in the postseason, just because I do think that again, and ironically, you're going to be playing Seattle again, but that Thursday night game, a few weeks back against the Seahawks, I think is kind of the game plan that Kyle Shanahan wants to use come postseason time, which is McCaffrey again and again. But the guy that stood out to me today, we'll hand out some game balls at the end, but the guy that stood out to me today, Mark, is George Kittle. Like I know we were talking about Deebo Samuel coming back into the fold off of injury and wanted to get him reps because he's going to need it. He's the second most important piece of this offense. Well, I got to reorganize my hierarchy, Mark. I mean, and not just because of this Cardinals game. Again, we're talking about what the offense has done since Brock Purdy has taken over as starter. George Kittle has been absolutely unleashed. And when you have a tight end that can get open in the red zone, that solves so many different issues, along with the fact that you can run the football and you can punch it in. It gives you just a different dynamic way to score points. And that's what Brock Purdy has done with Kittle. And not only did Kittle, he had two receiving touchdowns, but he should get credit for 3 because that second Elijah Mitchell 6-yard run, we're talking about pre-snap motion and guys, not knowing defense, not knowing where the offense is going. Well, George Kittle on the right side gets brought in motion to the left. And I don't know if there's a more disastrous combo block for a defender than Trent Williams and George Kittle, who absolutely mauled the defender on the outside to allow Elijah Mitchell to not be hit until the 1. And the moment he's at the 1-yard line, he's not going down after first contact. He muscles his way through for a touchdown. George Kittle absolutely sprung that 6-yard score to begin the second half and essentially put the game away to allow you to rest some of those guys. So you already gave him 1 touchdown in the first half. He gets the 1-yard score in the second half. He also creates the 6-yard run at the beginning of the second half. To me, George Kittle, even though 4 catches, 29 yards, a couple of scores at the bottom for those watching on YouTube may not seem all that impressive. To me, what he has done with Brock Purdy at quarterback has in my mind, elevated him to the second most important piece of this offense as far as position and skill players are concerned behind Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly up for debate, I would think. And I think maybe to be fair to Deebo Samuel, we got to let him get totally reintegrated back into the offense. I don't feel quite comfortable saying that just yet. But, I mean, your point about how Kittle's playing is certainly accurate. I mean, and also that last touchdown in the final minute of the third quarter, maybe one of the best individual catches we've seen from Kittle, a leaping grab in the back left corner of the end zone, a couple of toe taps, and he's in for his second touchdown of the game. He now has 7 touchdowns in the last 4 games for the 49ers. One of those games had 120 yards receiving. I remember talking that game in Mexico City against the Cardinals that George Kittle was going to have a breakout game. He had 2 touchdowns in that game because the Cardinals are just extremely bad at defending against tight ends. And George Kittle is now making a habit of dominating the Cardinals. You look at his last 3 games against Arizona last year in November. That's last season in 2021 in November. 6 catches, 101 yards, and a touchdown. In November of this past year, this season still, 4 catches, 84 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And then today, as you mentioned, 4 for 29 and 2 touchdowns. So his last 3 times out against the Cardinals, he has over 200 yards and 5 touchdowns. Again, in 3 games against the Cardinals. George Kittle is a Cardinals killer right now. And with Brock Purdy, he's just a killer straight up. He is dominating opposing defenses, specifically in the red zone. He is becoming Brock Purdy's favorite red zone target. It's not particularly close. And he's showing off his extreme unique skill set, which is separation from defensive backs and an ability to jump higher and grab balls away from opposing defenders. He's incredible, and he had maybe not the biggest day in terms of number of catches and yards, again only 4 for 29, but when it mattered most, he got open, and Brock Purdy found him consistently in that red zone. 2 more scores for George Kittle, a career high now, 11 touchdowns on the season.
Yeah, and I'll have to go back and watch not only this game, but some of those scores in the red zone specifically. My theory behind why George Kittle has been so good is because you have McCaffrey, who obviously you have to pay the most attention to, that forces defenses to use guys that are physical enough to stay with Kittle, linebackers, guys that can chip. It forces them to focus more on the run. And then George Kittle ends up being matched up with, a defensive back or someone in the secondary who maybe he's not faster than, but is able with his size to gain enough separation for Brock Purdy to kind of, fit a pass in like he did with a minute left in the third from the 1 yard line. So either way, he's playing some fantastic football, as is Brock Purdy, who adds another 3 touchdowns to his ledger, 13 touchdowns and 4 picks for him now on the season. He's been absolutely fantastic. But Mark, back to the entire premise of this, which is, could you have scripted a better game for San Francisco today? I'm just looking at the math, and Ayuk 4 catches, McCaffrey 3, Kittle 4, Deebo 2, rushing, Mitchell 5, McCaffrey 10, Mason 8, TDP, Ty Davis Price 8. Like, I legitimately do think this is the way that Kyle Shanahan, if he had his pick of the litter, would have wanted this game, which is you use McCaffrey as much as maybe a little bit less in the first half, but he's the focal point. And then once you start to get those turnovers, which Arizona, look, it kind of just felt like a matter of time before they were going to start making mistakes on offense. And when you give this defense, and especially Brock Purdy, extra opportunities with a short field, it almost is guaranteed that they're going to capitalize on them. And so, like again, this was a +4 turnover differential, the 8th straight game that the Niners have played with a positive turnover differential, this longest streak in the NFL. So back to, the entire game itself, the defense playing well, the offense maintaining its performance, and Brock Purdy playing about as efficient football as possible. Obviously 10 wins tells you they're playing the best football going into the playoffs, but just looking around the NFC, I mean, Jalen Hurts looked pretty mortal today for Philadelphia. New York certainly has a chance to upset Minnesota. Dallas got freaking waxed by Washington today, and Tampa Bay is a team that I really can't figure out. So it does feel like, Mark, heading into the playoffs, it does kind of feel like it's San Francisco's to lose. I don't know if you feel that way, but that's kind of what the last couple of weeks have been telling me.
Well, I think in relation to the Eagles, it was pretty clear early on the Eagles were not going to run Jalen Hurts and let him take any unnecessary hits, because that's the one thing that could undo their season, as we've seen now the last couple of weeks. So that offense wasn't nearly as explosive as they normally are, because the Giants, around the second quarter, maybe halfway through the second quarter, around halftime, they figured out, okay, Jalen isn't going to run the ball. Like, let's defend like he's not a mobile quarterback. Like, he doesn't have his extreme, nice ability to run the ball. And then the game kind of changed at that moment. That'll be different in the postseason. So Philadelphia still, I think, is the number one threat, and it's not close for the 49ers in the NFC. And maybe I'm getting a little too in the weeds here for the 49ers specifically. And obviously, once they got up by 20 points, this wasn't going to be a game where the Niners, as you mentioned, just gave McCaffrey the ball a bunch more times. I mean, he had 13 touches in this game. 11 came in the first half. The other 2 early in the third quarter. I don't think he had a touch in the last 25 minutes of game time. And that was nice for the 49ers. You got Jordan Mason, 8 carries. Ty Davis Price, 8 carries. Elijah Mitchell, as you mentioned, 5 carries. Not only is this starting unit, Evan, for the 49ers, their starting skill group as good as any, probably the best. I will say not probably the best in the NFL, but they're showing as well. And I know this was garbage time, but they've got some depth. I mean, Jordan Mason and Ty Davis Price ran the rock really well. And I know those are rookies that you're not going to lean on in the playoffs. At least you would hope so. If you do lean on those guys, or you probably have a larger issue that you're dealing with. But the Niners are deep as well. So I think they're not only do they have the best starting unit in the league, Evan, but they might just the best offensive group, period, going deep into the bench and into their sideline and deep into the depth chart. This team was showing off, and it's scary when you consider the fact that the defense is the better unit, but this offense is putting up 30 points like it's nothing, and it doesn't matter who's on the field. Deebo Samuel came back for the first time in a month. He had 1 carry, he had 2 catches. Just imagine when he's getting the ball 8, 9 times in a game in the playoffs, and he's breaking a 15-yard run here. He's making 2 guys miss. He comes in motion. McCaffrey's in the backfield. McCaffrey split out in the slot. Elijah Mitchell's in the backfield. George Kittle, he's your red zone target. There are so many guys to worry about. And then they have reinforcements coming in off the sideline. This offense is becoming unfair.
It really is, and the last point I want to make about this game too. I also one thing that stood out to me was, if you're talking about depth, I don't know how much we'll see of those running backs in the playoffs, but I do think we will see that depth of the defensive line in the postseason, because that is something that D'Amico Ryans has consistently done in order to keep his guys fresh. Outside of maybe Nick Bosa, who's out there for the majority of snaps, but Jordan Willis has really come along
Strip
in the
sack.
last half of the season, who obviously picked up a sack today, forced a fumble. Looking at the defensive line, McGill, obviously, Ebukam and Amenahue split a half sack in the game today. But you got Javon Kinlaw, who started today, maybe didn't play as many snaps as you would have hoped, but you're trying to keep him fresh. And if that's a guy you can just add in and sprinkle in, that's a huge asset. McGill, Hyder, I mean, even at the linebacking position, I know Shire went out during the game, so Burks had to come in and fill in. But he did an all right job. Flanagan Fowles, I know, was also hurt. But like this defense also, if we're talking about depth, I do think that is where it lies, maybe even more than the offense and the kind of the horde of running backs you have back there. And I do think it's something that will also play in the postseason, just because of how they like to consistently attack and beat you at the line of scrimmage. So that defensive line was impressive to me today, and they have been really the entire season.
Yeah, I mean, the one question I think defensively, and obviously Dre Greenlaw's a question in terms of health.
Yeah.
Um, Kyle Shanahan did say before the game earlier in the week, he was asked what if this was a playoff game, would Greenlaw play? And Shanahan said potentially, maybe, possibly. So at least that gives you confidence that it's certainly not something that the Niners expect to be too long. And I would say it's really too early to be talking about this now, but I would say there's a good chance that he does play against the Seahawks in the wild card round, which, by the way, will be on Saturday in the 1 o'clock hour. It'll be the first game of Super Wild Card Weekend in the NFL. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But defensively, we talked about Lenore off the top. That is still the weak spot of the defense. In garbage time, we did see Janoris Jackrabbit Jenkins get in. He made a tackle. I'm not saying the Niners are going to make a change like that, but it's
Odom?
clear. Odom's more of a safety for the 49ers than Deommodore Lenore at corner. Ambry Thomas was a healthy inactive in this game. He was not available to play. That'll tell you what the Niners think about him as a cornerback, at least right now. The Niners are relatively thin there, and we've seen a couple of teams now target Lenore's side of the field consecutively in consecutive weeks. So that'll be something to keep an eye on as the Seahawks, who boast a really good passing attack, and how that does fare in the wild card round, which we'll talk more about as the week progresses. But that still is the weak part of the defense. But ultimately, I mean, it's still the best defense in the NFL. So just trying to, get better at anywhere you possibly can. If there was one weak spot, it is that one. But it's just also because everywhere else is so dang good.